Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in to another episode of the Invisible Condition podcast, a show where we talk about unusually normal things. Okay, so before we get into it, got a quick question. How many of you have ever received a message from a stranger saying they used to be you? Strange, right? Well, through the power of sharing my personal story on LinkedIn, a ghostwriter who used to write under my name reached out. He said that he used to be me and then proceeded to share his story about living with hemophilia. But the random encounter isn't the theme of today's show. Imagine with me for a moment. You have a child who's born hemophiliac, and you ask yourself, do you pad the world or pad your child? Shaun's parents raised him to embrace the world, not to fear it, and this has shaped his entire outlook. He knows his limitations, but he also knows his strengths. He was raised to embrace his condition and not fear what might be to come. So, let me ask again. Do you pad the world or pad your child? Stay tuned to hear Shaun's amazing outlook on life and to hear his encouragement on how to bring visibility to invisible conditions. I'm excited to have you on the show, Shaun. First off, because you've been me,
yeah,
which is odd to say, but it's kind of true, isn't it?
It's very true. Do you want me to give a little bit of the backstory for your listeners?
Let's do it. I think we need
So my business is content writing, and what that means is I'm really a ghostwriter, and I wind up throwing my voice a whole lot. And as it so happens, Tim's old company was a client of mine. And so I think the first piece was published under my name, and then all subsequent pieces came under Tim. And I have been everybody, so I don't really think too much about it. There's no ego in what I do. But fast forward probably a year or two later, when I'm on LinkedIn, came across a post of yours and about your then recent surgery. And I'm looking going, why does Tim's name sound familiar? And I couldn't place it. It had been a while since I'd worked with them. Couldn't place it until I clicked on your profile and went, oh my God, not only do I feel like I know Tim, I have been Tim. So I've put words in your mouth, and I hope they were good ones.
Yeah, it's not every day, and I don't know if it'll ever happen again where, I get a LinkedIn message saying, hey, Tim, just so you know, I've been you. I like your post, let's connect. And
a little Matrix.
When I read that, it was, I read it late at night, and I looked over at my wife and said, okay, this is so strange. And so I went digging, and I couldn't figure out the connection until we got on a call, and then it just made so much sense. And thank you so much for making me sound brilliant. You are a brilliant guy. Your mind is brilliant. You're such a gifted writer, and you just I went through the content that you shared about which ones you've created, and it's so fun to, when I was at the publication, to just dream up content that we wanted to produce, and my editor at the time would then go and find writers, and you were one of them, and so brilliant. I love that story.
Well, we should add that he's all the way in Europe, and you and I are both in Canada, but it shows you just the power of that sort of global world and what we can do online. That, we were connected as two Canadians through someone who is off in another part of the world completely.
Yeah, and then the LinkedIn algorithm somehow fed you a post of my vulnerable share of surgery and as I live with Crohn's, and you reached out and said, hey, I live with something that's invisible. Let's connect. And here we are. I threw out this post on, hey, I'm thinking about doing a podcast. I want to tell stories for people who embrace their whole selves and to share. And you were one of the first to reach out, and here we are. We're recording.
That's awesome. I'm so happy to be here. Truly.
Yeah, and I think that's a good segue into you. So you're a content writer. Your background is unique. I love it. So why don't you, before I don't want to put words in your mouth.
Yeah, sure. Happy to kind of, walk through the quick version of the journey. So I'm a storyteller, and that's my job title, which is the fun of what I get to make up. But I've been doing it since I was a little kid, and I was, 5 years old writing storybooks, complete with like an about the author and sketching, images of myself for a fake dust jacket. Like that's how far back. This is truly in my blood. We're talking over 30 years. And I, then decided, okay, maybe journalism is for me. So I was, editing the elementary school newspaper and the high school newspaper. I was just back at my old high school this week and got to see the old high school newspaper office, which is much nicer today than it was 20 years ago. So they've spruced up the joint. I went off to journalism school to start with. I unfortunately took ill, a whole separate incident, but I took ill at that point. I didn't get to finish that degree. So I got into undergrad in English. I went back into journalism school and I did a postgraduate degree in journalism that I loved. Loved every second of it. We can talk more about that. And, interviewing people and radio really is my passion. So podcasting is kind of a fun way to play that game. Different way of, doing business. And then, there weren't a whole lot of jobs in media. So I sold my soul and went to law school. And I went to University of Windsor, Faculty of Law, in Ontario. I graduated. I had an articling position, which is sort of that a year of clerkship that you need before you are called to the bar as a lawyer. I was called to the bar in Ontario in 2016. I practiced employment law for a little bit. I did a little bit, left. It was not a great experience. I said, okay, this is not for me. I didn't even know if it would be for me when I got in. I had left. I wanted to go do other things. I worked in marketing roles, and I wound up getting called back in by a firm that I had kind of always wanted to join up with. So I'm glad they called me. I did another year of practice with them, and that year was a great learning experience because it taught me that I absolutely do not want to be a lawyer, and that I never want to touch another legal file again as long as I live. So I left, and we can talk about the invisible illness made visible there, because that was really mental health rearing its fairly ugly head. And I didn't know what the heck I was going to do next. And I am lucky to be married to a woman much smarter than I am, who kind of elbowed me in the ribs and said, "You're a writer, go and write." So I had written previously. I had my own blog that was meant, for a broad audience that won a couple national blog awards, and I had written for firms that I was with and some other, private clients, even going back to, 10 years prior, pre-journalism, or after journalism school, forgive me. And I was not sure, where the road would take me, but I hung a shingle. I put up the world's worst website in one post that said, "Hey, I'm here. I'm happy to help." And suddenly, people knew that I could write. So the barn doors started to open up slowly and then kind of burst open. And now it's almost 4 years later, which is surreal. And I am running a full-time digital marketing agency of one.
Wow.
Yeah.
What a journey.
It's been wild.
Of journalism, law, employment law, and then that aha moment of this is such a gift and I don't want it. and then pivoting back into your passion. And I think there's a whole lesson that we can learn just about pursuing passion and paying attention to the cues in our life of, I don't know if this is what I want to do. So do I want to be miserable for the next 10, 15, 20 years? Or how can I build something where, I can be able to put food on the table and shelter overhead and then do something that I'm passionate about.
Well, that's it. And I kind of had always had the misconception, and I think the reason why I avoided trying to write professionally is I had this limiting belief that writers don't make a living. You have this image, and I joke of, the writer, traveling off to Paris and sitting, starving on the left bank of the Seine with a beret and a notebook, just, staring into the water, pondering life. That was my sort of romanticized image of what a professional writer looked like. And that's not true at all. And I'm grateful for some of the folks that kind of got me out of that mentality. For everybody who's making $4,000 a year writing, there are other writers making $4 and $40 million. And we're all using the same words, the same alphabet, at least in the English language. And so what are they doing differently? There's obviously a way to, and not that I'm making $4 million, don't get me wrong, but there's obviously a way to make a living doing this if you do things that support making a living, being creative.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you'd mentioned an invisible condition while you were in journalism school, and when we connected, we not only bonded over content and the strange persona of Tim, but also over living with an invisible condition, but we've chosen to make it visible to the world.
Mm-hmm.
And why don't you walk us through even just that journey of making that leap and into the visible, but also what do you live
Yeah,
with?
I'm happy. I live with a couple things that I'm happy to chat about gladly. So the first identifier, and I think the blanket one that kind of controls all, is I'm a severe hemophiliac. Which, for those not in the know, look up the royal family. Which just means that blood does not clot, and so if you do injure yourself or if you overextend, generally as humans we sort of microbleed every day internally, and we have the mechanisms to clot. It sort of falls like dominoes in the sequence of clotting factors that can help us form a clot. But if you're missing a domino, suddenly the rest of the sequence doesn't
Hmm.
fall and you end up in some trouble. So it is well controlled, and people unfortunately knew it from the 80s and tainted blood when it was a fairly ugly situation. I am beyond fortunate as I knock on my desk to have escaped the worst of that. And I am, relatively healthy, all things considered, which is an absolute blessing. I, have my issues for sure, and issues that are, becoming more and more visible. But on the whole, I'm very grateful. But that meant, a childhood of uh, really strategic decisions about how I lived my life. I had amazing parents who were absolutely wonderful. It goes back to at the time when I was a baby and a toddler, and they're trying to figure out how to navigate all of this. There were really two schools of thought, which were, and this is sort of goes interesting to the rest of my philosophy. It was either pad the child or pad the world. And so generally, these kids obviously are not super careful and they bruise easily. So you'd see children in almost like foam suits, like a cartoon. They're wearing sort of, foam rollers and helmets and doing whatever they can to, parents to keep them from impact of kids fall down and go boom. And in my case, my parents said, no, pad the world, let them explore. And so, my parents are still in the same house I grew up in, and there's still markings of duct tape from where they put, foam barriers on, the fireplace
Wow.
ledge and any other kind of sharp corners. But it let me live with some degree of normalcy. And it let me go out and
Hmm.
explore the world and try new things. And they always encouraged me. It was never really about the limitations, it was about going out and trying new things and staying active and seeing the world. And it's ironic because I wonder what my life would have been without it. I'm built like a football player. I might have played football, but I'm also not athletic, uncoordinated, don't have a deep love of sports. For me, it was never. But there are kids who grow up who are sports addicts with this, who either will defy doctors and do it anyway, or they grew up bemoaning what they couldn't do. That was never me. I don't think that's my personality. But it's an interesting kind of worldview. So that, obviously went through childhood. I spent, my earliest years at my doctor's office 3 times a week getting my injections until my mother started doing them from home. I was sort of, I'm a mama's boy anyway because my mom is wonderful and I'm very lucky, but I was also tethered to her because she did my injections till I was about 15. I
Hmm.
receive an IV medication that has now gone down in frequency, but it used to be really every other day. So it meant that I was never
Wow.
far, literally from home, whether I was there or took her with me. So that meant,
Hmm.
she was the chaperone on school trips and overnights. And, one night was okay. 2 nights I had to kind of give some thought. Or if I, then got into like my high school youth group where we started going away for longer, okay, how am I going to do this? What resources are available? Who can help me out? Where is the nearest hospital? Etc., etc. And the older that I've gotten, management has changed a little bit, and I'm a little bit more exploratory. But I'm running my mouth at this point, so
Well, I'm just thankful that you're sharing that insight because I never thought of it from a pad the world or pad the child perspective.
mm-hmm.
Um, I'm thinking back to people I know and youth that I know who are still in my life who kind of live in that world of, okay, we're gonna pad the child a bit, but then the child grows up and it's like, well, no, we can't just continue to pad the child. The child needs to live. The child needs to go and play sports. I think of a nephew of mine who's type 1 diabetes, and he loves basketball, but it throws his sugars so far off that the next day after a game he's a
Mm-hmm.
mess. But yet his parents say, go for
Yep.
it, be a kid, and we'll deal with it the next day. And he just loves that. I mean, the alternative of that is to sit on the sidelines, but that could potentially have another effect. And so of extreme severe hemophiliac. And I'm curious, as you've kind of gone through life, even entered into that workforce, how has that always been in the back of your mind, or has it always been there in the back of your mind as like a sense of anxiety or a sense of pressure?
So yeah, in a couple ways, it certainly plays into the decisions that I make. So the first one, and the one that sort of really is defining, and there's some other issues in childhood. There's some liver issues. There is some fibromyalgia there for a couple of years that made just about everything painful, that I've, thankfully managed to combat fairly well. But there was a time at a sort of just preteen years, about 12 or so, I missed something at school. I think it was a school play that I was supposed to have like a one line in. And I missed it for a hospital appointment that was sudden, beyond my control. Not one that I could have had any say over. But they decided, instead of just having someone else say the one line, again, it was not an integral part, they canceled the show, told everybody that it was my fault, that it was canceled, and then effectively turned me into the scapegoat to blame me for, ruining everybody else's hard work and good time. Awful. Not the way to run things remotely. But it scarred me like you can't imagine. So it left me with years of me being really hesitant to commit to any set dates or timelines, because I never knew what my health would be. I never knew if I was going to have a spontaneous hemorrhage. I didn't know if I would be mobile or up and around or well enough. And, I spent a lot of years going through sort of undergrad, etc., being very nervous about, you know, committing to any sort of set date and time. Obviously, things have priorities and you can do things earlier, etc., and you can work around. But it being somewhere at a certain time and place terrified me. And it took a lot of years to get over that. And I have been, and I've done, quite well. Even going into getting married and the day of my wedding, it's like I knew that I'd be okay, and I've really managed to improve my health overall in those years. But there's always that concern of, oh boy, I need to make sure that I am well enough to be here and do this. And I think that's something that a lot of folks with chronic health issues face. So, especially entering into the field of law, into a field of, court deadlines and client deadlines and tight deadlines and high pressure demands. It was certainly a consideration of, okay, can I book a court appearance knowing that I will be mobile enough to get there, that I'll be able to drive, or I'll be able to walk into a building, whether I'm on a cane or, what have you, that I can get to where I need to be when I need to be there. So that was always a big consideration. I feel like there's something else that I was going to include, but that's a good starting point.
Well, I think it's a great starting point, and something that I know I personally relate to, and the anxiety that comes with having a chronic health condition, whether it's visible or invisible, and setting deadlines and the anxiety around that. And it's like, okay, I've got to be somewhere. Am I actually going to be there? What's going to happen? And even though that incident happened many years ago in your school, it's still on your mind,
Sticks with you.
And it sticks with you. And so I think anybody who's listening it's so important to control the words that we're using and saying. And it's like, well, but Shaun, you look fine. I don't understand why it got canceled. Like it's harmful.
Yeah. And so I guess the other piece, no, for sure it is. I think the other piece is really disclosure and how that's kind of changed in my life over the years. It used to be the most identifying thing about me, because I was either constantly being pulled out of school, I was constantly at the doctor's, I was often on, canes and crutches. And it's jarring when you see someone one day and the next day they show up on a cane for, no visible reason, or they're limping, and you're sort of going, what's wrong? What happened? If you see anybody, who suddenly they're walking well one day and the next day they're dragging a leg, human nature is to inquire. And kids were a mixed bag. Some of them were really wonderful about it. Some had a lot of dumb questions. Some of them used to steal my cane and run away, because that's what kids do. And then as I get older and I'm entering the workplace, etc., and I've always been on the side of, and I'm an employment law, professional, or where I was, forgive me. So I understand, the rules, etc. But I've always been personally on the side of disclosure. I've never had an issue, with disclosing. I had, through my teens and 20s, informed employers of, hey, this is it. And as I really sort of was able to take control of my health and it affected me less, it became more of a, this is something that's here, it's on the table. It might never come up. It might never, for example, I worked a job in the interim year between finishing journalism school and going to law school. And I was there for, I think, about 10, 11 months. I think the hemophilia cost me maybe a half a day. That's less than most people's sick time. Actually, that year I caught bronchitis. I was out for 4 or 5 days. That knocked me on my butt. But in terms of, the bleeding, it was, I think I maybe missed a half a day, if that. So it, as I've hit those years, and then as, you age with it still, you realize you hit the point where people don't know. And there's people who you just haven't told, and so they don't know. And it really hasn't come up. It's not the most interesting thing about you at a certain point. It's not the thing you lead off a conversation with. So I'm now, I'm on the board of directors of a major chamber of commerce. I don't know that any of them know, my background and my health history. Quite honestly, the only reason it used to come up in a lot of working conversations was on my resume. I had been involved with the Patient Society, with the Hemophilia Society. So it was, on my resume, which I didn't mind including. I was there as a volunteer. And it became a conversation piece a couple times. People would gently ask, obviously within the, guise of the law and good HR practices. And I have no problem disclosing. But you hit the point where it's no longer your leading characteristic. And that's where things get interesting, because that's navigating another new world on top of, the one you've been thrust into.
Yeah, it's there's a couple things that come up for me, and that is, well, disclosing to an employer, and you've got the employment law background, so I'd just love to touch on that a little bit, because I'm reading quite a bit about disclosing and what to disclose, and is it right to disclose, but also how it doesn't define you. It's part of you. It's just something you've been, you were born with, given, and it's kind of shaped your life, but it doesn't define you in the context of the negative side of things. Does that make sense?
It does, and I'm kind of happy to go on both. And I'm going to preface any disclosure talk with the fact that I'm no longer practicing, I'm not insured, none of this is legal advice.
Absolutely.
So let's put that right on the table. And you have the HR background as well, so we can kind of talk shop at a higher level, but also make sure that we're at the same level that's cool for your listeners. So the rules of disclosure, at least sort of across Canada, are relatively straightforward. There are human rights protections under the law for disability, and protections for patient privacy, etc. So an employer, at least here, is not entitled to your medical records. And there's no situation where they would be. You do not have to disclose an illness, in most cases. You simply don't. Really, what an employer is allowed to know is how it impacts them. So, if I am having a joint hemorrhage, for example, and I was working at a factory, they don't need to know what joint is bleeding, what I'm using to treat it with, what my prognosis is detailed. They don't need to know that. What they need to know is, okay, so Shaun can only stand for 15 minutes at a time and then needs a stool to sit down. And it'll be like this for a couple weeks. And there's forms that get filled out, and your doctor's part of that process. And that's where, accommodations come into play. So you don't have to disclose, a lot of this illness. You also cannot be discriminated against for, disclosing certain things. So if you're disclosing whether it's hemophilia, diabetes, HIV is one, obviously, that comes up. Employers cannot make discriminatory decisions based on disability. Now, the law is one thing. Does it happen? Of course it does. If everybody followed the law, there'd be no need for lawyers. So, does it happen? For sure. Is there, improper things that go on? For sure. Is there horrible injustice? For sure. So you're always sort of running the risk of, okay, well, what does the law say? But what is this actually practically going to mean? If you are working for a real piece of, let's say human garbage, and you disclose something and you're terminated or penalized because of it, that's absolutely wrong, doesn't make it right. Now puts you on the defensive of having to fight to, get that back, and it's another piece of stress and headache for you. So never to say don't disclose, but know that, even though the law is on your side, they protect you. There's certainly challenges that people face. So
There
that was
are.
half of it, and then we can go to the other half in a second if you like. You have to remind me what it was.
Yeah, well, I think what comes up to with at least people that I've been talking with is, I live with something, and it may affect my work. It does affect life, but I'm fearful. I don't want to share. And I think it's important to know that, well, you have a right. It's your right to either share or not share. And if it is impacting your job, then you have a choice. You can either leave that job because it's impacting it, or, run the risk of performance problems. But at that point, again, I would encourage. I'm an advocate. I'm a pretty transparent guy. Is if you've got the trust and support from your organization, then choose what you want to disclose, because I would say more often than not, people are compassionate, but there are, as you said, the human garbage out there where it's like, I don't care. You just get your job done. And so I think it's important. I know you've chosen to disclose, and very publicly, here you are sharing on a podcast, and same with me. But just to honor those who don't feel that comfort to disclose.
That's
I
okay
want to
too.
say that we're still with you.
You're still with you, and your battle is your battle, and you wage it how you need to wage it. That's completely okay. But you're right. I think more than less, people are compassionate. They're kind. They're understanding. They might have questions. They might have silly questions. I mean, when I was in school, there used to be a video that was put out for patients that my mother would show teachers every year. You posted about the snack box, wasn't it? Was that you? Your Was it a manager sending you
Oh,
snacks?
yes,
Yeah.
yes. Yeah. A manager sent me, a bunch of, he didn't understand what it
So
was,
he did his
what
own
Crohn's
research.
was. So he did research, and he realized stress was a big component. And then he thought about my wife and my kids and the stress on them. So we came back from the hospital to boxes and boxes of groceries, because he knows how stressful it is to maintain a household. And, my wife made a comment on that post of that day she was stressed to the point of tears about how is she going to find the time to go get groceries and feed the kids, because there was not a single banana left. There was no apples left in the house. And here we walk home, or we show up at our house to boxes of delivered groceries. And, I chose to disclose. Well, I had to. I was sitting in a hospital bed and phoned him up on a Monday and said, I'm not going to be in the office today. So, I had no choice but to share. And I shared quite vulnerably, and he
But
thanked
that's
me for
that's
that.
something that's so amazing. You're not gonna have everyone that takes the initiative to do their own homework, but and everyone's needs are different. And just because someone has the same condition, no two needs will look the same. So some people
Mm-hmm.
will need physical assistance, whether it's groceries or accommodations or what have you. Some people just need support, whether it's an ear to
Mm-hmm.
listen or just an understanding shoulder. And some folks don't need anything at all, and that's okay too. And they're sharing just as another fact about themselves, just like I am
Mm-hmm.
6 feet tall and have red hair and a beard and glasses. It's just part
Yeah.
of who I am.
And it's just part of who
I'm
you
not
are.
actually
And
6 feet. I'm shrinking a little, but
okay, I was gonna say, like, oh, interesting. You're 6 feet. Okay, I didn't know that
I
about you.
say I'm 6 feet.
Um,
It's probably the biggest lie I tell myself.
yeah, you are 6 feet. Yeah, just gotta sit up when we sit in these chairs for so long.
Exactly.
It's we feel compressed, and again, you kind of alluded to it just again, and you did earlier on, is the defining. It's just another characteristic of who I am.
Mm-hmm.
And when thinking of in the work world, when did that transition happen? Or maybe it happened earlier on in life. Is like, okay, this is just who I am.
So I think what it's done is it really had impacted career choices. I had a fairly, interesting incident, and the kind of the most job stress that I've had with the hemophilia. I was a tour guide. We have
Mm,
double decker buses around
okay.
downtown Toronto. I was on those, kind of in the hop on hop off tours, and it was a great summer job in my undergrad. I loved it, but I had a problem with an ankle, and they were accommodating to a point. Then they kind of stopped
Mm-hmm.
accommodating me, and I wound up having to basically do way too much physical work, standing when I shouldn't have been standing, when I should have been resting. And almost 15 years later, my ankle is never the same because of it. I'm arthritic because of that role. And it, thankfully mild as anything. I mean, there's certainly far greater workplace injuries out there, but it is a lasting, impression that stays with me and really taught me about the importance of accommodations and also job choices. A lot of
Mm-hmm.
the hemophiliacs that I know, a lot of us, funny enough, are lawyers or have other sort of desk jobs, partly out of necessity. We are aware of the fact that while we can talk about having no limitations, there certainly are some. A lot of us, are in different physical states, and so we pick careers that won't, accelerate things or make things worse, and a lot of that requires, desk work. So even as a journalist, going back, I loved it. I loved radio. I loved the newsroom, but I wasn't about to go be a war correspondent. That just was not going to be in the cards for me. Not that it couldn't have somehow been arranged, but that was never my path, and that's okay. So it's a matter of sort of making really pragmatic choices. Now, as I'm, more stable, but my joints are really starting to suffer from age, I'm grateful to have a role where I am at my desk more often than not. I have to fight to stay active. That's, my own challenge, and I try. But I also know that I have, a very comfortable chair on days where and it's it's impacted my home purchase of a bungalow. Same thing, less stairs. That I have, a soft spot to land when I need it.
And I love that you share that, where it's, it's part of who you are, and the limits, and you don't let those limits slow you down. It's, how do I shift? Okay, I know I'm not going to be a war correspondent. Um, I know you're not going to be a stand-up tour guide, but you've adjusted and kind of weaved your life into a way that, hey, it supports you, and you can live your best life, and through that. So I really appreciate you sharing that, because I think, at least for me, when I was diagnosed with Crohn's, I didn't understand it. This was early in my teens. Nobody understood it, so we just kind of ignored it.
Hmm.
And when you ignore something for so long, it comes back. It just doesn't go away. And that's a story for another day. But embrace it and learn how it becomes part of your narrative, not to define who you are and who you become. And I'm really curious. So you're
I
married.
am.
You obviously disclosed to your partner, "Hey, I'm a hemophiliac. Do you know what you're getting yourself into?" Um, I would just love to hear a little bit more about her as a caregiver and somebody who supported you. I mean, she supported you to go, like, quit
She
law.
supports
It's
me in
causing you too much
everything.
stress. Yeah, I'd just love to have a little bit of insight into that.
It's interesting. I think this is kind of universal with chronic illness in finding a partner, because you do need someone who is a understanding, be a little bit compassionate, and see somebody who will be willing to slog it out for the long term. You know that not every day will be pretty, and you need somebody who's going to be okay with that and okay with the challenges that brings. So we've had an interesting. We are made for each other, but we've had some interesting times. For example, I have an accessible parking permit for my car. I used to hide it. I only ever use it if I am physically in need. But I used to hide it regularly because, I was in my 20s and I was dating, and you don't want, a girl's first impression to be, oh, why does he have, a permit that's usually just associated with old people or, wheelchair users. And finally, it took me a while, with my wife, and I realized, okay, forget this. And she knew, I'm like, yeah, I just keep it now on permanent display, and it's always on permanent display, and it's attached to my visor, and that's fine. Ironically, my wife has a crippling fear of needles, and I do IV medication. So cue the Odd Couple theme. We're a pretty funny fit in that regard. So my parents are always of the belief of find someone who can help you with injections if you ever can't do it or this or that. Yeah, she's not helping me with injections. She leaves the room. She's gotten much much better over the years. She still won't go for her own blood work, but she's happy to support mine. And she is incredibly supportive. We had to kind of learn a little bit early on, how to navigate each other, especially with this. She, for example, we saw him last night. She's got a friend who has a spinal cord injury and is a wheelchair user. And his approach to life, he's a Paralympian candidate, really strong, tough guy. But his approach to life is the "I'll do it myself." He's tough.
Mm-hmm.
He navigates the world and does a darn good job of it, and so do I. But I need a little TLC sometimes. I
Mm-hmm.
need a little bit more handholding. I need someone to kind of help me up when I can't physically get up, literally. And so it was sort of navigating the differences there, but we learned quickly. And she's been wonderful and supportive, and is probably more aware of my limitations than I am, and is more
Mm-hmm.
cognizant of them. So it really came up, as an off topic as we were house hunting. Part of the reason why we're making a move is because there's just too many stairs in this house, and I cannot physically do the stairs like I used to. I'm having some real trouble. That meant that we're looking at bungalows and ranchers, and things that are few stairs or really single level. Whereas I might like the look of a back split or a side split, and she'd say, "No, that's too many stairs for you." And where I can do 3 or 4 or 5 stairs most days, and I can do it easily, and I am active, and I live on a Peloton, and I'm still up and around. She also knows the days where I cannot do 3, 4, or 5 stairs, or I am going down the flight of stairs on my butt, to give you a fun visual. And that I don't want to be captive to a house that I cannot use, that we can't
Mm-hmm.
age in. So she's very astute. She's incredibly bright. That's just a fun characteristic. But she really has a lot of empathy and understanding for me and my world and what that comes with.
I love the shout out to your partner, and it's just so awesome to hear just that support and that care, because that's so important to our living with something, living with a condition, and illness, disability, and that support system that's around us. And a question that I've been asking all the guests on the show is, and our purpose with invisiblecondition.com is to remove the stigma, not reduce the stigma. I would love for us to remove the stigma that surrounds invisible conditions, specifically things that just aren't visible, to create a more inclusive world. When you hear that, what comes to mind? How are we going to do this?
I think talking about illness as a part of life and as reality. I also have dealt with, we don't have to get into it in detail, but I've dealt with mental health issues that I've also been transparent about. It's part of what pushed me out of my legal career. And that's something where, a lot of folks will opt to sort of run and hide, and, because it is usually so invisible. In my case, it was really quite visible because it really impacted who I was, as well as the career changes. And I chose to, instead be loud and vocal about it versus hiding in those shadows. I think that's the gut instinct that a lot of us make. I just spoke with a friend before we were this recording who unfortunately went through a very difficult miscarriage. She just told me, and I didn't know. We're not super close friends, but she said, I've been trying to talk about it. I said, aside from offering condolences, supporting, thank you for, that should never be a point of shame, but yet is for so many people. We, if we think about FDR, in the 30s in his wheelchair, and how, had an agreement with the press not to shoot him with the wheelchair, show him, with the leg braces, because disability was seen as a sign of weakness. And invisible illness was, this weakness that was a character flaw. It's not at all. We have grown out of that largely, but still not enough. We need to take charge of the narrative as those with lived experience. We need to reshape it. It's on us. People don't understand always on their own, and that's okay. I think we can help them get there by having that voice and saying, this is part of who I am. It either does not define me, or it has helped shape me, but it does not limit the extent of what I can do, whatever that means for you. But having that control of the narrative, because if you don't take it yourself, no one's going to give it to you.
Hmm. What a powerful statement. If we don't take it ourselves, nobody's going to give it to you. And so take control of that narrative. That's something I'm going to go and reflect on, because I think that's a powerful message. If we let somebody else to try to define our narrative by saying, Shaun, you look healthy enough. I don't believe you. Or I don't understand and I don't care to understand. Having that voice, sharing the voice. You've been very vocal about being hemophiliac, and you've alluded to your mental health struggles, and that's such an inspiration. And so, but often I've had so many people reaching out, and I'm guessing you've had people reach out to you through your vulnerability. Is like, I'm just too afraid.
Yep.
I'm afraid to share. What advice do you have, or what insights do you have for somebody who is afraid to share?
I think it's fear of the unknown. And I think it's sort of fear of, what are the consequences? And you don't always know what those consequences are going to look like and how people will react. And sometimes it's shame, and sometimes it's just, this desire for privacy. Or we associate, a certain illness with a certain direction. You look at mine, and I've certainly faced some discrimination, and very mild, but from it. Where the initial image a lot of people had was the 80s of, HIV. And there was a commercial from just before I was born of, the baby crying. And I don't know if you remember this. And this baby's bleeding on the inside, I think, was the narrative. And it aired really broadly. That was you're a young guy like me, but that was kind of the narrative that most people had about hemophilia.
Yeah.
So, when you share, I think you're nervous of what everyone else's impressions will be. And thus, going back to our point, I think it's partly your role as an advocate to redefine those impressions. And, let you shape the narrative versus letting someone else shape it for you and having to either fight your way out of their box or, instead of staying on the defensive, you can really have control over that situation.
And you're absolutely right. Control over it. I was reading an article by a very prominent someone in media here in Canada who recently disclosed that she was battling cancer. And she didn't disclose this while she was during her career and single mom, because she wanted to focus on her family, her health, and her job, and keep some things separate. And I never thought of that from that perspective, and I completely respect that. It's not of, hey, if you have something, you need to share it today. Get out there and shout. But I love what she said about controlling the narrative. She wanted to control that narrative. And so because she's a very public person, this is how she was able to control it. And now's the right time. Now's the time that she needs to share of, hey, this is what I struggled with, and this is what I'm living with. And so, for those who are listening and going, well, is today the right day? You'll know when it's the right day.
You'll know. And she's, I saw that news story as well. She certainly had faced her own issues. And if we're speaking about the same person, she'd, lost her husband just previously to cancer. You don't know what you, as soon as you share, and you've probably seen this with your diagnosis, you open yourself up to whatever feedback you're going to get, positive, negative, and everything in between. So you'll get a lot of weird questions, get a lot of weird recommendations for home cures. Most people are really well-intentioned and trying their best. So as an on-air personality, you'd be drowning in cards and letters and homemade potions and such. And, some people, that's really supportive for them, and that's great. And for others, that's their idea of a nightmare. And, they don't want any sort of public spectacle. And that's fair too. That goes into personality and other things.
Absolutely. There's no wrong way or wrong time, and you'll know, like we both said, you'll know when it's the right time to share. And by putting it out there, it's very vulnerable. You'll get messages of people that say you need to do X, and somebody says you need to do Y, which contradict each other, and it's usually out of a place of care. Hey, I want to help. We want to fix this, so here's something to try. And it's a whole other conversation. And Shaun, as we kind of wrap up our conversation, I'm just really inspired by your passion to share, how you articulate your story so well, and I can see your journalism background just playing into that story. I love it. When you think about a world without stigma, it surrounds the invisible. What encouragement do you want to leave for people, to our listeners, as maybe they're a caregiver, as you give your shout to your partner, or somebody who's living with something, or you're in the workplace, you're maybe an HR or a manager who knows something's going on with somebody. Where do you want to take this? What encouragement do you want to leave?
For those going through it themselves, I'd say the sky really is the limit. And the limits that exist on you are the ones that you're going to place on yourself. So get out of your own way, live to the best of your capabilities and abilities, whatever that looks like. Your version of healthy, your version of normal may not be the same as someone else's, and that's okay.
Mm-hmm.
And you do so. My version of wellness is not running the Boston Marathon. I think that's out. I'd love to learn to tap dance. My ankles are shot to hell. I think that's out. But there's other things that I do. I love my Peloton. I love to walk when I can. I do X and Y.
Yeah.
So just finding the ways to live to your potential within, whatever limitations are imposed upon you. Anything else are ones that you're just imposing upon yourself. So that's number one. For the caregivers, compassion and understanding goes a long way. It's a slog. It's a slog. Know what you're signing up for. And so many stories of someone is just diagnosed and they say to their partner, "Look, if you want to go, go." And it's awful, but I could see where those conversations happen because it's not always easy. And you want to make sure that it's the right person. For me, especially as I was searching for a partner, and I was young and I enjoyed dating and having a good time meeting new people. But when I'm searching for something long term, it was really okay. I know this might not be as easy in 10 years or in 20 years, and I know what that future might look like. And so I need to find the right person, not for today, but for 10, 20 years down the line as well, for whatever my health may be. And I'm so unbelievably grateful to whomever that I did find that person for me, who can help me through it. But it is certainly, in sickness and in health is a real thing. For those in the workplace, I loved that piece about your boss sending groceries. And not everybody will do that. But, instead of asking all the stupid questions that have danced around, making awkward conversation, I think there is asking how you can help is great. And I think there are some great online resources, if you do come into information, to A, be caring, be compassionate, but also learn a little bit, learn what some of the issues are like. So for example, what are some of the side effects of medications? I mean, you might not be able to deal with someone's treatment per se, but if they're fatigued, you can be a little understanding. If they have some brain fog from whatever treatment it is, you can be a little understanding. Whether it shows up in a, functional abilities form to get technical in a workplace form, or whether it's just something that you've noticed. There's the saying that everyone's fighting a battle you know nothing about, but it's true. You just don't know with invisible illness what people are going through. And so leading in general, no matter what you do, with some extra kindness and compassion, I think goes a long way to helping others.
That's such a theme, is kindness and compassion, and care, and get curious, and don't don't be sending recipes for home remedies that your second cousin twice removed had tried and it worked for them, because it might not work. And I know that's something we jump to, but asking questions, and just even asking, how is it showing up in work? Is it affecting you? How can we best accommodate?
Yep.
And work together. I think that's the key, is working together to figure something. And it may not work in your favor as an employee, but starting that conversation, starting that narrative is so. I'm just a proponent.
Well, and recognizing that everybody is different, and every condition
Yes.
is different, and even with something like IBD and Crohn's and colitis and such, is that you might have two employees with Crohn's disease, both of whom are at very different stages. One might be in full remission, one might be very ill and going through the worst of a flare up. So it's a whole mixed bag. Meet somebody where they're
It
at
is.
and see what you can do to help them.
Yeah, I love that, Shaun. You're an inspiration to me, even before we even met. You're an inspiration through your content, and now I'm so glad that we've connected. And for those who might want to reach out to you, just to give you encouragement, or also to just ask questions about your journey of career and writing and everything, your partner, everything. Is there a best
You
place for
can
somebody
get
to
me
reach you?
anytime. Yeah, so my company's called The Right Stuff Agency, WRITE Stuff Agency. So you can Google, we're all over that, and therightstuff.agency. My email is Shaun, Shaun, at therightstuff.agency. I am on Facebook with that. I'm on LinkedIn at Shaun Bernstein or at The Right Stuff Agency. On Instagram at The Right Stuff Agency. I'm around. So reach out, tell
You're
me you heard me on the
everywhere, and
podcast. Happy to chat.
yeah, for sure. And I'll put all the links in the show notes as well. And so again, Shaun, thank you so much for coming out, for sharing us some encouragement. And for those who are listening, if this resonates with you, if you have questions, or if you have resources that you found helpful, shoot me an email. And my contact info is on the website invisiblecondition.com, or find me on LinkedIn as well. It's Tim Reitzma. So for those, again, who are listening, if you like what you heard, if you have suggestions, reach out. And I hope you are super encouraged today as I am. So with that, Shaun, thanks, and I hope you have a good one.